I learned today, like back on the topic of Doctor Who,
Of course.
it would be great, wouldn't it, if they sometimes had the Star Wars approach where they had all the multimedia stuff that could tie in and make a big cohesive universe. But I learned today that there's BBC policy which actually blocks them from doing that.
So what
Oh,
do you mean? What do you mean? Like, what do you want?
So, like, who has the potential to have a big cohesive universe where, like, it's sort of like almost how they had it in Russell's era, where you've got the main show, where you've got the spin-offs, they all weave in and out of each other, telling a big cohesive story, a bit like the Arrowverse in that regard. But then, you've got your big finish on the side, and you've got your comics and your books and all of that. And I feel like there is ample opportunity to have more interconnectivity on the level that Star Wars has. The show has the ability to do that.
mm.
But I learned today that there is BBC policy blocking people from actually doing that on the basis that the prime show has to be all inclusive and that you mustn't be tied down to consume all of this other material in order to understand the story.
Imagine if they did that to Star Wars, Lawrence,
Mm.
and in between, and if they did that to Star Wars, you'd have that time skip between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Because Clone Wars goes a long way to explaining how Anakin's attitude. I mean, start of Clone Wars is sort of ahead of Attack of the Clones by like a small amount of time, but like it goes a lot to explain the evolution of his character from point A to point B.
Mm.
Whereas if you just go from Attack of the Clones straight to Revenge of the Sith, it's like, okay, how did he get from here to here?
Multimedia pushes like that help drive hype for upcoming releases. Like, for example, you could have a series of novels that might help set up things that are going to be shown later down the line, I suppose. And, there's ample opportunity to do that with Who. Like, you could start seeding in things, but the fact that they don't do it kind of explains why all of the novels are so standalone.
It's not big like these big finishes things. I'm not super familiar with them, so I don't know the nature of them. But they're like stories, right? But they're audio stories.
Yeah.
Do they have no tie-in at all
They don't
to the
they don't
any
like
of?
actively set up things for the show because they obviously have to follow from what the paving stones that the show lays. They tell their own. Most of what they tell is standalone stuff, or like with the Eighth Doctor stuff, for example, Anthony's example of Clone Wars filling in the gaps between these 2 points. Well, the Eighth Doctor's got all the Time War stuff, which is helping flesh out that a bit more. But that's the best example. But even with like they obviously the part of the problem with Big Finish is that they don't have the license to the current era as it's being transmitted. Once Jodie regenerates, then they'll have the license to do 13th Doctor stuff. That as it stands at the minute, they can only do up to Peter Capaldi.
Mm.
But I think of this just it's a real pity that there's no collaboration between everybody working on the live action stuff and everybody else producing all of this ancillary material and going, hey, this is a plan we've got for this season. Maybe we could start dotting things here and there to generate a build-up of hype for this thing that's going to be coming out later down the year. It's just a huge missed opportunity of their marketing strategy, I think.
Do you not like just to be devil's advocate? Do you think it's not important that they should keep Doctor Who like as accessible? Because you literally, correct me if I'm wrong, you could start watching from Jodie Whittaker and literally have the same experience as someone who's been watching Doctor Who for all this time. There's no need for major catch up, besides maybe some stories here and there.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it has more rewatch value as well because, Lawrence, you tried to do Arrowverse. That's like the far left version of like storytelling. Like, when you have all things tying in together and all of that, it can get very tedious
There are certain points in Who that are designed to be entry-level places, such as Series 1, Episode 1, Rose, or Series 10, Episode 1, The Pilot. But I don't think Jodie's era is the same, because even in her first one, there's things like 10 minutes ago, I was a white-haired Scotsman. There's always references, there's heavy references in her case to stuff that has happened before. So I don't think her stuff
like-
is as accessible.
It's along similar sort of talking points, but one of the things that Stan Lee said about comics in particular is that every individual issue of a comic is somebody's first.
Mm.
And comics initially were never sort of... It was rare for them to be where you'd have multi-part storylines that would then get packaged into a trade paperback.
Mm.
So there'd be more one-off, more done-in-ones. So initially, in the early days, you could just pick up a single issue of a comic, get the whole story, move on to the next one. But nowadays, you've got all these trade paperbacks, and then
But that's very much what Doctor Who's like, isn't it? Because each story is kind of standalone, which helps make it accessible. But it does have the underlying continuity of the series-long arcs and its multi-layered history in there as well. And I can see the logic of trying to keep it accessible because it's a family show. And yeah, you don't want to be bogged down by knowing what Torchwood is, or watching the Sarah Jane Adventures and stuff like that, or Godforsaken Class, or listening to The Big Finish. Sure, I understand it's quite dominating and it's quite overwhelming, but at the same time, I feel like they could adopt a better strategy to bring in all of the licensees, because they sort of did it with Time Lord Victorious in a way. They had Big Finish, they had the Titan comics, they had novels, they had all of these different facets coming together to create a more layered story, apart from the TV show, of course. But like, that's a recent example of them at least trying something like that. I wish they would do it more grander scale, where they actually get the TV show involved, and that would help boost things way more.
Yeah, I guess because I don't notice it as much because I've been watching it for years, but there are certain points of Doctor Who where even I would get to like a certain episode and I'm like, that's going to be a block, that's going to be undiggable into for someone. It'd be like jumping into this as your first offering out of the Arrowverse.
Sure.
Like, if this is your first thing, you're lost because you're like, why is this dude dead? And who's this chick in the white leather? Why?
It'd be like Series 4 Stolen Earth and Journey's End, wouldn't it?
And even like the last special of Jodie's Doctor Who, like people who got on board with them as far as the Matt Smith era aren't going to have any idea who Captain Jack is.
That episode in particular relies on you having foreknowledge of the previous Dalek episode as well, doesn't it? Plus Jack's last appearance, plus who Grace is, and just, you know, that Trump guy from Arachnis in the UK. It relies on all of that. And that's the thing about Chibnall's era. Despite its spanky new production quality and all of that, there's a lot of throwback. It almost relies too heavily on especially Russell's era of the show. It references it more than anything, which, you know, for someone like me who adores that era, and it's the era that I grew up with, that's like, hey, cool, I like it. But I do recognise that it is maybe relying on it just a bit too much.
So maybe there is precedent for there being interconnectivity within Doctor Who, but maybe not as much as you want.
Not to the scale of the potential that it has. Like I said, the recent Time Lord Victorious thing was a push, but it didn't involve the main show. Therefore, it was kind of forgotten about after 2 or 3 months when all of the stuff had come and gone. I feel like we could illustrate and use all of the different facets that they've got to promote the main show and to generate a high level of hype.
I read your review of was it Echoes of Extinction, Lawrence? Is also some of that lack of hype going on down to the fact that some of it was late or delayed.
Yeah, because like by the time, because that only came out the other week, but the majority of the Time Lord Victorious stuff like finished off late last year, and this should have come out at that time, but it was only delayed because COVID made the vinyl release delayed, and this was going to be a special thing where it was released on vinyl. But I think that fundamentally harmed it because most of the stuff has gone now and finished, and there's this big push for Dalek Universe and the Ninth Doctor Adventures and the War Doctor Begins and all of that. That you're just like, oh yeah, there's this one last piece of TLV which exists. Huh. Yeah, I forgot about that.